Jane Kirkham to move the motion.
Thank you, Mr Efferden. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship today. We're here today about floating offshore wind, particularly in the Celtic Sea. It's the next frontier in the UK's clean energy transition, and it's positioned to unlock up to 4 gigawatts of power by 2035. That's enough to power 4 million homes. There are huge opportunities for Cornwall, the southwest of England and Wales. The Celtic Sea is all around us. The ambition to put floating offshore wind here in the southwest, where it would complement other offshore arrays, and the opportunities that arise from it, and for Cornwall and the region, are poised to expand supply chain, our economy and our people from those skilled, good jobs are vast. However, to be quite brutal, so far, ambition is pretty much all that it is. So the first question is, why floating offshore wind? 80% of the world's potential offshore wind resources are in deeper waters. The Climate Change Committee estimates the UK needs 100 gigawatts of offshore wind by 2050, which is only feasible with the development of flow. Flow is new technology, and the UK could be at the forefront of developing it for a global market rather than relying on overseas supply chains and losing out on new investment in industries for the UK. And the potential for the jobs is vast. So why the Celtic Sea? Offshore wind has a successful history off the east coast of the UK. However, the wind blows both ways. And by developing the Celtic Sea, you can maximise the energy generated and mitigate the intermittency. Previously, it wasn't possible due to the depth of the seabed, but new floating technology has opened up the region to development, and it could be a huge opportunity if it is done well. The current government target is for 5 gigawatts produced by flow by 2030. A 4.5 gigawatt programme in the Celtic Sea, as modelled by the Crown Estate, is estimated to lead to 1.4 billion GVA and 5,300 jobs in the development of port infrastructure and critical component supply across the region. But there are barriers. As I've said, it hasn't got to the stage that we hoped it would be at by now. One of the barriers is the Contracts for Difference programme. After the failure of auction round 5 under the last government to secure any flow projects at all, the most recent funding round under the new government did result in the Green Vault project in the North Sea, securing CFD funding in AR6. However, the budget for that pot was still too low for more than one of the 3 bidding projects to be successful. To reach the government's decarbonisation goals, Contracts for Difference will need to support multiple flow projects in each allocation round, and those vital test and demonstration models, those stepping stone models in the Celtic Sea. Projects in the North Sea have received significantly more investment to date and have more developed supply chains and port capabilities, enabling them to deploy flow at lower costs. There's no offshore oil or gas legacy in the Celtic Sea. It's a greenfield site, and it lacks the infrastructure it will need to scale up. It needs targeted support to reach equity with the North Sea, having only had one successful floating offshore wind project in previous CFD rounds across the Celtic Sea has knocked investor confidence. So although it's a fantastic opportunity, there's a risk that investor interest in the region could be lost if we don't progress quickly. Ports. To support the development of floating offshore wind, we need upgraded ports. This requires significant capital investment. However, again, uncertainty around the development of flow has led to investors holding off on development of those ports until CFDs have been awarded. This has led to a mismatch of timelines, as ports need the investment about 5 years before the project is built out. FlowMIS has provided financial support for Port Talbot, although it hasn't yet been deployed, as I understand, but other ports in the region are also needed to deploy floating offshore wind. A multi-port strategy needs to be pursued in the Celtic Sea to make the most of all of the existing ports and specialisms. So we have Falmouth, of course, which is mainly why I'm here, but Appledore, Plymouth and Milford Haven as well. So there are many ports and port clusters that could be got up to speed to help with the floating offshore wind in the Celtic Sea. France are unfortunately ahead of us. They've committed 900 million to the port of Brest, and we do need to catch up. This government's 1.8 billion ports fund and the National Wealth Fund could really help to provide that leading investment and certainty required to kickstart the port investment if it's done quickly in a strategic way. The stepping stone projects, the focus of developers in the Celtic Sea is currently on these stepping stone or test and demonstration projects, which have a really important role in giving confidence to the industry and reducing the cost and the risks of future commercial scale projects. There are currently 2 stepping stone projects in the Celtic Sea which could be eligible to bid into the next Contract for Difference auction round, Erebus and Whitecross. But both of these projects face challenges in terms of planning issues and bottlenecks onshore in Devon and with investment. Hexagon's Twin Hub project is the first and only flow project in the Celtic Sea to win a contract for difference so far in AR4. That consists of 2 turbines in Cornwall Council's Wave Hub. However, it now faces the same rising costs as the rest of the renewable energy sector, as well as the challenge of developing a supply chain in a region that hasn't yet had the opportunity to do so. The contract for difference price has therefore become less and less viable over time. As a more expensive, smaller test model, it was never really going to be commercially viable in that way. But as a stepping stone project, it's crucial to the development of flow and associated supply chains in the Celtic Sea. There are options available, making a deal with the end user for the energy or allowing Twin Hub to rebid for a lower CFD price, but a proactive and creative solution does need to be found for these tests, to make these test and demo projects viable and to scale them up in the long run. A consistent pipeline of leasing rounds and CFDs is key to scaling up skills and supply chains ahead of commercial projects coming forward for development. They would encourage developers to commit to the region and lay down roots and plan ahead and invest. Annual option fees also have an impact on developers' ability to use local supply chains, which need more time to establish. This increases costs and pushes projects towards using overseas supply chains, removing the benefits for local communities and investments into the region. More could be done by the Crown Estate to support local supply chains, and once the Crown Estate Bill has become law and investment funds are set up between developers and the Crown Estate, this could change. Falmouth Port is prepared to match government funding to get up to speed to support the project of Twin Hub, and there is a risk that the economic benefits of this project may go overseas without additional funding to help develop the supporting onshore industry. The development of flow in the Celtic Sea will need huge amounts of mooring line, electric cables, anchors. The region is currently not ready to supply these, and a unifying strategy is needed to encourage the necessary investment to develop these capabilities along with others across the region. And the Floating Offshore Wind Task Force has identified realisable UK value in key components for floating wind, such as installation, mooring and anchors, concrete platforms, steel platforms, operation and maintenance and development services, ports and logistics, and those array cables. At present, the national grid is a large barrier for projects. The Twin Hub project has been struggling to get the full grid capacity they need until 2037. We need a far-sighted and coordinated approach from the National Energy System Operator, NESO, which has been newly nationalised. NESO are beginning a holistic network design with the Crown Estate, but this does need to happen very quickly and be scaled up. The Celtic Sea is a nationally and potentially globally important infrastructure project, and as such requires a specific strategic focus from central government. Having a GB energy strategy on Celtic Sea flow, with hopefully even a presence in the region, maybe Cornwall, would support coordination of infrastructure, industry and workforce. There are a complex set of stakeholders involved, though, including government at all levels, national, devolved Welsh Nation and different levels of South West councils, and the Great South West, which is a pan-regional economic partnership. There's also Celtic Sea Power and the newly set up Cornwall Flow Commission, who've already done some of the work required to coordinate the supply chain and work out how to produce a skilled workforce. This needs a very concentrated focus. Plus, there's currently no joined-up spatial strategy for the ocean for the Celtic Sea. Consultation on that strategy for the ocean with fishers, with conservationists and scientists also needs to be done very soon. Having a unified strategy would enable phased development and, crucially, support the prioritisation of investment in infrastructure and the local supply chain. and a unified strategy would also help streamline those planning delays. Current planning and consent is too slow. A project currently takes an average of 15 years to move from leasing to operation, and to reach this government's net zero goals, we need to speed up that process. And for example, the Whitecross test and demo project has been struggling to get planning consent for, I think, over 18 months in North Devon. So what do we need? What are the key asks to get this going? A one-size-fits-all approach for the whole of the UK has not produced the necessary investment to get floating offshore wind off the ground in the Celtic Sea. By putting it in direct competition with the North Sea, the Celtic Sea is likely to continue to lose out, and the UK will lose the opportunity to harness all the benefits flow can bring. AR7 should and could ring-fence funding for floating offshore wind along either geographical or technological lines. Geographic ring fencing would remove direct competition with the North Sea, while that technological ring fencing would improve the competitive position of those test and demo stepping stone projects, which are so crucial to get those commercial sites up and running and play a critical role in maintaining investor confidence in the region. To overcome the challenges of developing onshore supply chain capabilities to deploy flow in the Celtic Sea, the government could support collaborative and strategic investment in ports, rather than putting them in competition with each other as the FLOMIS scheme did. A specific targeted wealth fund could be created to invest in infrastructure, supply chain, and to lever in private investment, with particular focus on ports. In the short term, we can have logistics hubs and technologies to include temporary portside space like Tug Dock in the southwest, but long term we need to invest not only in our ports and our infrastructure, but in our rail, our road and our digital. A coordinated approach to how DESNZ, the Crown Estate, GB Energy and the National Wealth Fund exercise their procurement and auction processes, and use of WTO and TCA exemptions for reasons of national energy security and net zero targets could give freedom to add clauses into the contracts and leases to encourage that local supply chain building and workforce training investment by developers. Some developers having expressed interest in doing that and even setting up headquarters to coordinate that. The Crown Estate's option fees and the rules around how they are used could be reconsidered, so they could be deployed as a catalyst towards greater investment in that regional supply chain. And DESNZ and the Crown Estate could put supply chain, social value and biodiversity net gain incentives directly into those local delivery mechanisms. We have world-class FE colleges in Cornwall ready to step up and provide the specialisms and the scale of the workforce we need. But we need direction and funding and a long-term career pathway. We have discussed previously a Flowmark programme to build up those schools specifically for this industry in our region. So in summary, we need a unified national strategy for floating offshore wind and a regional master plan for flow in the Celtic Sea. Without a strategy, we risk losing out on the benefits of this nationally important infrastructure project, including its potential export potential. And we risk the goal of reaching clean energy by 2030. There is a huge future in the Celtic Sea, and we need to reach out and grasp it.
Very cool. We have plenty of time for this debate, so can I just remind members, there's, if you're intending to speak, to bob in your place, so I've got some idea of who's intended to speak. The question is that the House has considered floating offshore wind in the Celtic Sea. I call Henry Tufnell.
It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, Mr. Efford, and I'm grateful to my honourable friend for expressing so eloquently the challenges that we are facing in the Celtic Sea. And I would point to the work that we've been doing under our all-party parliamentary group for the Celtic Sea, looking at it from a regional perspective, because the opportunities are so vast that this is not a situation where we have competing interests trying to divvy up, so to speak. There is sufficient food at the table for all, and we have exceptional natural resource. The high average wind speeds with 8 metres per second, water depths of 50 metres, and these unique conditions provide that framework for us to achieve these election manifesto commitments that we as a party have put at the front and centre of our agenda. Clean energy, economic growth. In my constituency in Pembrokeshire, we have 1 in 4 children living in poverty. These are serious systemic issues which stem back multiple years, generations. And we come from a legacy of the oil and gas industry, which radically transformed my constituency in Pembrokeshire. But over time, we've gone from 4 oil refineries to 1, and we transferred into natural gas. So we've had liquefied natural gas. But the challenge is that as that has declined, what is the alternative for people in my constituency? How can we ensure that the brightest and the best can remain in the county, can succeed in these jobs for the future, and have that just transition happen? And the opportunity is there. This is our opportunity. If it is not this, then what is it? To have that prosperity, to bring back that opportunity, to give people hope in my constituency. But my honourable friend has set out the challenges that we face, and is incumbent on us, not only as individual members of Parliament, but as a party of social justice, a party of change, to rise and meet these challenges. We've been partnering with the Crown Estate. We've been looking at supply chain. We've got to tackle the issues of ports. We've got to look at CFD and fundamentally the picture of skills. Because at the end of 2023, there was a total of 230 megawatts net in terms of installation of floating offshore wind. We had 101 in Norway, 78 in the UK, 25 in Portugal, 23 in China, 5 in Japan, 2 in France and 2 in Spain. It is unusual, and it is incredibly exciting that the UK can play its part in leading a technology. That we are the forefront of this transition, and that we are at the forefront of not only this global challenge against climate change, but also looking to play our part in this reindustrialisation process. But if I turn to the Crown Estate, there have been issues, and my honourable friend has alluded to them. Option fees. These annual option fees that they're placing on the leasing round is going to have a devastating effect on the commercial viability of developers to facilitate those conditions to create that reindustrialisation package, to provide those jobs, to do that domestic manufacturing, whether that's fabrication, anchors, cabling. You know, the Crown Estate produced a report that for the first 5.5 gigawatts, we had 5,000 jobs, which will require 260 turbines, 1,000 anchors, and 900 kilometres of cables. But where are these going to be produced? We're going to have that in Spain, in South Korea? No. I want them in Pembrokeshire. I want to produce anchors in Pembrokeshire. I want cabling to be done in this manufacturing. I want people to do this for a future for Port Talbot in the steel in terms of providing that fabrication and substructures, because the prize is there and we just have to seize it. And it is simply not good enough. We have in terms of the Crown Estate, to sit behind and think about maximising their own revenue generation off the seabed. It is their time to step up. We as a government have united with them in terms of the legislation that is currently going through the House, in terms of allowing them to have that greater borrowing power. But the time is now. They cannot sit behind WTO rules as an excuse for inaction. They must seize the day and they must take control. And in doing so, create those conditions within that leasing round and create that pipeline. Because without that pipeline, there can be no security in terms of the developers. There's no security in terms of the local supply chain. We need to have a clear route to how we can realise those 25 gigawatts number that's been set out. Because this cannot be this whole project cannot be about maximising that 12% for the Crown Estate. This is, greed. This is not. This has to go beyond basic greed. One of the 7 deadly sins. The Crown Estate cannot be obsessed with maximising their revenue for the sake of greed. This is a project. This is a project for the benefit of the Celtic Sea, for the benefit of the country, and it's a project on which we undertake because it is so important, it is so vital. Now, on the supply chain, there are plenty of opportunities, and as I've set out in terms of those numbers, because there's an exponential growth from 4.5 to 12 to 25, and that has to be set out clearly, because as those numbers will increase, so will those supply chain, so will the demands in the supply chain. But the challenge for local developers, particularly that I've spoken to in my constituency of Pembrokeshire, is that there is no certainty of revenue. They cannot plan their own. They cannot plan those contracts because they are not in place, and they are not in place. A, because there's a lack of strategic planning, but B, because the conditions have not been set up. The cost. If you're a developer, right, and you come in and you bid for it, you bid from a seabed lease, you get it. You're hit with annual option fees. You've had to pay through the nose to try and get that seabed leasing. Why are you going to spend 20% uplift on paying for an anchor in Milford Haven when you can go and get it from overseas in whichever country you choose, which has the lowest common denominator on price? There is an upfront capital cost here, but over the prize is in the long-term realisation of that benefit in terms of cheaper bills, in terms of a reindustrialisation, and for the UK once again to be leading in an industrial manufacturing force. This is no small prize. And on ports, it is incumbent on us, and I repeat the words of my friend in terms of the challenges that have been facing Port Talbot with getting the money out the door from Flomis, but we have equal challenges in the port of Milford Haven. We need to have that confidence, and that confidence comes from government, from setting those conditions. And I've been incredibly encouraged by the words from the honourable friend, the Minister who is present today. Is absolutely fantastic, but also from the National Wealth Fund, that we have these mechanisms now in place from our Labour government to create that foundation, to create that confidence for the private sector to invest in ports. And that's from where it will all stem from, alongside the ports, the supply chain, but also the skills. We have a great, fantastic college in Pembrokeshire College in my constituency, and they have been doing fantastic work with the private sector to upskill the facilities that are available to students in the college. We recently unveiled a new facility with Shell, who have invested £1 million into Pembrokeshire College. These kinds of partnerships between the public and private sector to upskill people, to address that skills gap, are so fundamental, but we have to have that coordinated strategy, because without that strategy, it falls apart because of the nature, because of how complex and how difficult this is. We're going from a situation where we didn't have an industrial strategy, where we had a situation from the previous government where the market would decide. We create conditions, and then we go to the lowest common denominator on price, and it's all anyone's business. No, that is not the way that we approach things. We have a strong lead from government. We create the conditions in respect of public investment, facilitating that private investment, and that's the way in which we try and have a reindustrialisation and addressing that regional inequality. But my honourable friend also makes a critical point on contract for difference, which falls squarely within DESNES. And I say that the issue that we've had with these stepping stone projects is that floating offshore wind is inherently a nascent industry, and it's not well suited to that competitive framework which is driven by the lowest cost per megawatt hour. And the fixed didn't have to contend with that when it was beginning as an industry and as a technology. And so we're forcing floating offshore wind to play in an inherently competitive market, and which it is totally not ill-suited to. And if I might just also add on the topic of grid, capacity is a real difficulty, and that is going to be a real challenge. I mean, we have a grid connection in Pembroke with coming out of our RW with the Pembroke Net Zero Centre. But the level of power that is going to come off these turbines, if we can get that pipeline, is phenomenal. Could be such as half as the UK's power needs. We have to meet that challenge. There has to be, and I'm glad to see the Labour government take the bull by the horns, if that's the right expression, on the national grid, to change it, to attempt to change it, because I think the key is merit. We have to prioritise these projects like this, and that comes back to the fundamental question today, which I think is delivery. This has to be, the complexity of this project is therefore, and the crux of all of this, and the crux of the government, if I may be so bold, is around delivery. And therefore, it's an honour to be a part of this debate, to try and push this agenda forward, and I'm grateful. I move.
Perrin Moon.
It's a pleasure to serve under your chairship, Mr Efford, and I congratulate my honourable friend from Truro and Falmouth for securing this debate on floating offshore wind in the Celtic Sea, and the passionate words of my honourable friend from Pembrokeshire there. My right honourable friend from Truro and Falmouth has identified both the opportunity and the challenge at hand, and I am pleased to compliment the framework that she has set out. I want to emphasise the cross-cutting issues of skills, but also the importance right across Cornwall of developing Falmouth Port. The development of floating offshore wind technology in the Celtic Sea represents not just a renewable energy opportunity, but a chance to transform Cornwall's economy and establish the UK as a global leader in clean energy. In terms of the share of renewables in our total energy mix, fixed offshore wind, supported, as my right honourable friend from Pembrokeshire mentioned, supported by contracts for difference, has been crucial and will continue to be, as pointed out in the recent NISO report. The UK has been able to capture jobs in the development and operation and maintenance phases of the fixed offshore wind supply chain, but not in the capital phase, like manufacturing and installation. Most of the parts the UK uses are deployed from mainland European ports using imported components. Despite the successful rollout of fixed offshore turbines, we can learn from these issues, as floating offshore wind represents the next generation, as was mentioned earlier, of technology out in the Celtic Sea. In 2023, Tim Pick from the Clean Power 2030 Advisory Commission published an independent report on offshore wind, and in the report he highlights the case of Kincardine floating offshore wind. And why am I taking the debate from the Celtic Sea up to Scotland? It's because the report describes how the foundations for new floating offshore wind structures were made in Spain at great expense, taken to Rotterdam for assembly with locally sourced components to keep down costs, and then finally towed to Scotland and installed. This is indicative of the offshore supply chain, which means fixed offshore wind has not captured as many jobs in the UK as it could do. And the Celtic Sea floating offshore wind sector has the potential to create around 5,300 jobs across Cornwall, the southwest of England, and yes, Pembrokeshire in South Wales. But there remains a real risk that we don't grasp the potential by building up the local workforce. We need to demonstrate that young people and skilled workers don't need, in Cornwall's case, to migrate from Cornwall for well-paid employment opportunities in the green economy. Floating offshore wind in the Celtic Sea is a relatively, as my honourable friend from Pembrokeshire just said, a relatively nascent industry, which means the skills and workforce of this future industry need to be supported, planned and nurtured. If we don't do this, the industry will not be able to recruit the staff needed for these vocational and technical skills. A reactive, short-term approach to upskilling will be inadequate. What we need is to look at long-term strategic approach to the workforce development, one that focuses on clear, sustainable career pathways, such as floating platforms assembly, welding, and marine licence development. But these are just a few examples of the strong pipeline of talent needed for the floating offshore wind sector, and the skills required to populate the vacancies in the supply chain, such as the Blue Abyss facility, which was announced this week near Newquay, to have received match funding from the Crown Estate's Supply Chain Accelerator Fund. To make this vision a reality, collaboration is key. We need a collective effort to build workforce capacity in preparation for the opportunity presented by this new sector. Every stakeholder has a role to play, from individual learners engaged in skills training, schools, further education colleges, higher education institutions, independent training providers, as well as the private sector and future employers. There are several examples in Cornwall, most notably at Exeter University's Penryn campus, which happens to host the largest number of top 10 climate change scientists in the world, as well as producing world-leading courses and apprenticeships at Truro and Penwith College, and in vocational opportunities at Falmouth Marine College and Cornwall College in Camborne and Redruth, which is barely 1 mile away from South Crofty Tin Mine, which would also be a major beneficiary of a development of Falmouth Port. We know there are structural imbalances when it comes to qualifications. According to Skills England, 38% of people in Cornwall have level 4 qualifications or above, compared with 61% in London. The new Growth and Skills Levy, which will enable employers to access a broader range of high-quality training offers, will be fundamental if applied to this sector. Skills England will act as a vital bridge between industrial strategy, training providers and businesses. And I now turn briefly to Falmouth Port and infrastructure. And when it comes to the Celtic Sea, as my right honourable friend mentioned, we must regenerate Falmouth Port to enable the rollout of floating offshore wind, as well as becoming an absolutely key hub for operations and maintenance. To have the best opportunity to achieve economic growth and increase productivity, we need to build up our own supply chain. As turbines increase in size with the proliferation of floating offshore wind, there is a need for more larger scale and better equipped port facilities in general, as we've heard, which should be partnered with local manufacturing. To be clear, Chair, floating offshore wind substructures alone can measure up to 80 metres across and weigh thousands of tonnes, with the turbines themselves expected to reach as high as 300 metres. Ports need adequate quays, crane capacity and laydown space to accommodate these vast engineering structures. Where better to develop than the third deepest natural harbour in the world at Falmouth? Echoing my right honourable friend from Truro and Falmouth, we need the Crown Estate to lease more projects in the Celtic Sea. We need to ring-fence the funding for the Celtic Sea at the next auction round. I mean, we must work towards building up our Falmouth port capacity. If we are to realise a just transition, we must make sure that it delivers as much opportunity for UK businesses and communities as possible. Successive governments have failed to deliver these benefits to communities. The Cornish Celtic Tiger can drive world-leading deployment of floating offshore wind at commercial scale and sow the seed for a cluster of expertise and experience right across the sector.
Noah Law,
Thank you. It's a pleasure to share under your chairmanship, Mr. Efford, and it's a pleasure to follow the honourable member from Camborne and Redruth, who spoke so lucidly about the challenges we face in building a homegrown supply chain and not repeating the lessons of, or heeding rather, the lessons of history. I'm grateful for the opportunity to speak in this debate, very important one, which I congratulate my honourable friend for the member for Truro and Falmouth for securing, because floating offshore wind represents a truly transformative opportunity for Cornwall and the broader UK, an opportunity to bring jobs to our region while turbocharging the UK's energy transition. Cornwall's deep maritime heritage and strategic location uniquely positions us to be at the forefront of the floating offshore wind industry. The Celtic Sea's vast potential for renewable energy production can meet the challenges of deeper water, as my friend from South and Mid Pembrokeshire rightly suggested, and those challenges cannot easily be met by our traditional fixed offshore wind industry. So with 4.5 gigawatts of flow capacity envisaged for the region, we can power millions of homes with clean energy whilst creating around 5,300 jobs and delivering 1.5 billion of GVA to the local economy, with around a third of that expected to arise in Cornwall, which can play its role in championing the southern side of the Celtic Sea. So in Cornwall, this opportunity is not abstract, it is very much tangible. With the natural advantages of Falmouth Harbour, which we've heard so much about, with its deep water access and existing maritime infrastructure, Falmouth is truly a flagship location for our floating offshore wind Celtic Sea cluster. But its impact will extend far beyond Truro and Falmouth constituency, because for constituencies like mine, St Austell and Newquay, the ripple effects of job creation, skills development and supply chain growth can be significant. From industrial engineering of components, from logistical support, floating offshore wind can energise industries that in many cases already exist right across the spine of Cornwall. Yet, to make this vision a reality, we need political leadership, coordination. Central government must work hand in hand, ideally with a devolved government in Cornwall, with floating offshore wind at the heart of its industrial strategy. It must work with the Crown Estate, it must work with developers and educational institutions to address the barriers holding back this industry. And it is through unified strategic focus only that floating offshore wind can reach that potential. Floating offshore wind requires a new generation, though, of skilled workers in maritime engineering, fabrication and supply chain logistics. And that's why I will soon meet with the Skills Minister to urge Skills England to adopt a long-term perspective on this industry and its development locally. Institutions like Falmouth Marine School, as we've heard, and certainly Cornwall College, which is also based in my constituency, they're already laying the groundwork, but they need substantial and sustained investment to scale up those training programmes. And we must ensure that young people in Cornwall have the access to the skills and qualifications necessary to thrive in this sector and share in the great prosperity that it can bring to our part of the world. The scale of investment that is required is truly substantial, so ports like Falmouth, as we've heard, need to upgrade to become hubs for assembly, operations and maintenance, and I'm working closely with the National Wealth Fund to ensure that Cornwall features prominently in their pipeline of prospective investments. But we also need the tailored mechanisms that we've heard about, such as contracts for difference, that account for the higher costs and the early stage challenges of flow projects in this part of Britain. Without these, developers may turn elsewhere, and Cornwall in particular risks missing out on this once-in-a-generation opportunity. So for Cornwall to reach those full benefits of floating offshore wind, our public infrastructure must be developed alongside it and be up to the task. Improved road, rail and grid connections are essential. We need that freight line down to the Falmouth docks. We need the spine of Cornwall's infrastructure network to be strong, and we need to ensure that Tamar crossings don't financially disadvantage local residents, businesses or the logistics supply chain associated with this industry, and that we ensure the seamless movement of goods and people. The Crown Estate has a pivotal role in championing all of this and championing the floating offshore wind industry and showcasing Cornwall's strengths and potential in particular. And I welcome their recent decision to award match funding to Blue Abyss, which is in my constituency, and it's a world-class facility poised to become the centre of innovation for offshore wind energy and maritime technology. It's a really strong signal from the Crown Estate, but there is much more to be done, and we need to continue to prioritise that local supply chain development, working actively with local stakeholders, ourselves, and ensure that Cornwall's potential is fully recognised and utilised. The development of floating offshore wind in the Celtic Sea is more than just an energy initiative. It is an economic and social catalyst with the power to revitalise our communities, tackle regional inequalities, and cement Britain's position as a global leader in renewable energy. For Cornwall, it is an opportunity for us to build our maritime heritage and shape a sustainable future. To achieve this, we need a clear strategy that brings together government, industry and educational institutions. We need a spatial strategy that works hand in glove with the fishing industry to make sure this is a success for every part of our community. And we need the investment in skills, infrastructure and local supply chains to get this off the ground and ensure that local people come along with that prosperity. And we need to act urgently to secure those contracts, that funding and investment, and the confidence that will allow us to unlock the full potential of Flow and Cornwall's role in it. So I urge the Government to seize this moment and commit to the coordinated action we need to deliver on the promise of floating offshore wind. Together, we can harness the power of the Celtic Sea to light up our homes, to power our industries, and create a legacy of sustainable prosperity for Cornwall and beyond.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairship. And thanks also to the Honourable Member for Truro and Falmouth for securing this really important debate today, and especially for championing our fantastic Duchy of Cornwall as a green investment hub. Offshore wind in the Celtic Sea represents a huge opportunity to support the UK's energy transition. Liberal Democrats warmly welcome any government plans to invest in this sector with open arms. Not only will these turbines in the Celtic Sea bring renewable energy to over 4 million homes, they'll also help limit our dependence on fossil fuels, create jobs right across the southwest, and stimulate the much-needed economic growth in our coastal areas. These areas and the offshore wind sector as a whole were completely abandoned by the previous Conservative government, and I'm glad to see such an important industry finally getting the recognition it deserves. Just turning to some of the contributions that have been made and referencing the Honourable Member for Truro and Falmouth, she rightly talked about the need for the government to reach carbon reduction goals, and obviously the project in the Celtic Sea that's being discussed today is vital to this objective. The Honourable Member also emphasised the 5-year minimum lead time for investment, highlighting the urgency of this investment. The Member for Mid and South Pembrokeshire talked about keeping young people within his constituency in highly skilled jobs, which is something, as a member for a Cornish constituency and has been highlighted by other Cornish members, is so crucial, and that this project is such an enormous opportunity to do just that. He also alluded to some issues of the Crown Estate stifling competition, which I'll come to a bit later. And the member for Camborne, Redruth and Hale rightly pointed out the majority of parts for turbines and projects of this nature are imported from Europe, and we clearly need to see a much greater volume of manufacturing here in the UK. The member for St Austell and Newquay talked about Cornwall's deep maritime heritage, and as with some of the other Cornish members, he championed the deep water port of Falmouth. He also alluded to the need for a devolved government in Cornwall to fully unleash the Duchy's green energy revolution. And the Honourable Member also talked about transport infrastructure investment, citing it as an essential precursor to this revolution. It would be remiss of me not to point out, Chair, that when the Liberal Democrats ran the Department for Energy and Climate Change, we quadrupled the amount of energy generated from renewables. We recognise that the offshore wind industry can and will play a vital role in reducing our carbon emissions and hitting net zero targets, not to mention the benefits of increasing our energy security in this country, thus reducing our dependence on fossil fuels from Putin's Russia and other foreign despots. Offshore wind in the Celtic Sea in particular has the vast potential of becoming a powerhouse in renewable energy generation and will help to propel this country in its place as a world leader in the industry. However, we believe that much greater investment is needed, as has been alluded to already, in skills and training to prepare local supply chains and enable these communities to play a key role in the global build-out of floating offshore wind. There are also some concerns that have been raised with me about the role of the Crown Estate, which have also been referenced by other honourable members. The Crown Estate appears to have determined cheaper and lower risk deep fixed foundation designs and have been excluded from the licence bids. This, of course, narrows the pool of bidders quite significantly, whereas the key objective here should be delivery. The priority should be to issue licences which can be bought in production as soon as possible to drive down the UK's carbon emissions. Therefore, issuing licences that require projects 30 times the size of the UK's largest operational project feels a little bit like a risky leap, which could struggle to attract investment nor competition between bidders. It's also important to consult and work alongside groups like the Cornish Fish Producers Organisation when considering a project of this scale, being careful not to impinge on the livelihoods of Cornish fishermen. These groups are not inherently anti-offshore wind, but they urge for, in their words, sense and balance when planning such offshore developments. As Liberal Democrats, we would always emphasise the need for public engagement to ensure communities are involved and engaged throughout the process. Thank you.
Katie Lang.
Thank you, Mr Efford. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. I would also like to thank the Honourable Member for Truro and Falmouth. This is an important area successfully championed by the last Conservative government, and I'm glad of the chance to discuss it today. The Honourable Member's passion and ambition for her seat and for all of Cornwall is clear and does her great credit. These are complex issues involving major projects, long supply chains and very many public and private sector groups, which she has clearly taken a lot of time to understand, and I'm sure the Minister will be grateful for her suggestions. Her points, especially on the need for coordination between public and private investment, bringing in planning, bringing in skills, are very well made. The member for Mid and South Pembrokeshire outlined the size of the opportunity. This is a substantial potential prize, not just for the climate, but also for Britain's reindustrialisation. I'm sure his APPG on the Celtic Sea much appreciates his contribution, as is the case, I'm sure, for the Honourable Member for Truro and Falmouth. I look forward to seeing those anchors from Pembrokeshire, and they are lucky to have him to champion them. The member for Camborne and Redruth is another committed advocate for the great county of Cornwall and the fantastic economic potential of South West England and, of course, South Wales. He is right that workforce development must be strategic, coherent and long-term, and I was fascinated to hear of the outstanding university and college courses available, including within his own constituency. A Cornish Celtic tiger indeed. The Honourable Member for St Austell and Newquay also discussed skills, and I hope his upcoming meeting with the Skills Minister is as fruitful as he hopes it will be. His constituents, I'm sure, will be very pleased to hear of all he is doing to stand up, especially for the infrastructure his area needs, as well as the exciting supply chain and marine technology leadership that he describes. I was a little surprised to hear the member for North Cornwall's view that this area was neglected by the last government. Successive Conservative governments took renewable electricity generation from just 7% in 2010 to over half by the second quarter of this year. We made the UK the global leader in offshore wind, with more capacity installed than any other country, powering over 7.5 million homes. The last Conservative government committed a £1 billion investment to green industries through the Green Industries Growth Accelerator, aimed at advancing technologies like offshore wind. This investment aimed to leverage up to £90 billion over a decade. Could the Minister update us, please, on how much of this has been spent since the Labour government took office and how much is being directed to floating offshore wind? This debate is, of course, about the Celtic Sea, but I'm conscious that in the North Sea, the Chinese company Mingyang Wind Power Group is poised to construct hundreds of floating wind turbines if approved by the SNP. Mingyang benefits from massive state subsidies in China. So can the Minister please assure us that, be it in the North Sea, the Celtic Sea, or indeed anywhere, he will not allow any wind turbines built and controlled by hostile states, undermining both market fairness and our national security, in any of Britain's waters? The previous government set up the Floating Offshore Wind Manufacturing Investment Scheme, investing £160 million in 2 ports, one of which is Port Talbot, which is of course very well placed to serve Celtic floating offshore wind and has been mentioned already today. The investment was welcomed as supporting job creation in South Wales and the wider UK supply chain. The Crown Estate, as has also been mentioned by several speakers, later set out its plans for a new generation of floating wind farms in the Celtic Sea with the potential to power a further 4 million homes. Can the Minister please assure us that this exciting project and the investment secured under the last government won't get lost in the costs and bureaucracy of setting up GB Energy? Can the Minister please outline the impact on energy bills of the highest strike price put in auction round 6 by this government? And will the Minister please recommit to the government's manifesto promise to lower energy bills by £300? This government inherited global leadership in offshore wind, something I'm sure we can all be proud of, and the Celtic Sea presents a fantastic opportunity to build on that record. Thank you, Chair.
Mr Shanks.
Thank you very much, Mr Efford, and it is a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship this afternoon. And can I congratulate my honourable friend on bringing this debate today, and for all the work that she does on championing her area and the Celtic Sea more broadly. We have had a number of conversations and debates on energy-related policy, and she is a real champion for her constituency. And can I thank all members this afternoon for their passionate contributions. I don't know what the collective noun is for a group of Cornish Celtic tigers and one Welsh one, but they were fantastic contributions, and I think it gives a real sense of how seriously new MPs in this place are taking the future of their constituencies, and you should be very proud of that. The key issues that have been raised today, ones of grid, of supply chains, of skills, of planning, and of course getting the balance right, and I think the honourable gentleman from North Cornwall put that very well, so that we bring communities with us, and much of this is incredibly important. And I praise the honourable gentleman. It was nice to hear him speak about the coalition government. We don't hear enough about the coalition government these days. I encourage him to say much more about that in future debates, but I suspect he won't. Let me just say a little bit about the context that this debate is in, and then I'll answer some of the specific points. Because I think the why of why we're in this race and this transition is really important. Why we are pushing to deliver clean power by 2030. The truth is that it is an imperative. If we are going to meet our long-term goals of decarbonising the economy, but also if we are going to deliver economic growth and energy security. They are intrinsically linked. And a number of my honourable friends have raised the point today about the potential of jobs and industry in communities that have for a very long time been forgotten in many of these cases. And the rates of poverty and underemployment in these communities underlines how important it is that we bring these new opportunities here. I think the legacy point that my honourable friend from Pembrokeshire raised is important. This isn't just a transition for the sake of a transition. It's to deliver the good, well-paid jobs for future generations, to make it a prosperous transition for so many communities. But we are in no way missing the scale of what this challenge is. Delivering clean power by 2030 will require us to rip up the rulebook of how government delivers on big projects like this, to take a radically different approach to how we deliver change at pace. And it means working in lockstep with communities and with the private sector to rapidly address all of the barriers, many of which have been raised today, that hold us back, so that we can build unprecedented levels of new clean energy infrastructure. The Government received recently the National Energy System Operator's advice on how we could achieve a clean power system by 2030, and it shows not only that this is achievable, but that it can create a cheaper, more secure system. And that advice will inform the Government's Clean Power 2030 Action Plan, which will be published imminently, which will set out our route map to how we decarbonise the electricity grid, with the aims of protecting bill payers from volatile gas prices, strengthening Britain's energy security and accelerating us towards net zero. And I hope all honourable members will agree that we are on the cusp of a once-in-a-generation transformation of our energy system, led by a government that's determined not to be a passenger on the big questions of the day, but to drive forward, as my honourable friend put it, for real radical change. And the infrastructure that we deploy now and in the years ahead will set in train decades of energy security, stability and prosperity for every part of the UK. And key to that will be the role that offshore wind plays, and particularly floating offshore wind, and that's what I want to focus on in the rest of my remarks. Offshore wind is going to play an absolutely crucial role in our mission to make Britain a clean energy superpower and to deliver clean power by 2030. At 14.8 gigawatts of generation, we have the highest deployment in Europe and the second highest in the world. And as my honourable friend said so eloquently earlier, the UK is a global leader. And there are not many things these days that we can still have a claim to do that in, but this is one that we must ensure we maintain. The new technology unlocks deeper areas of the seabed that can benefit from stronger and more consistent winds, helping us to secure our energy supply and to deliver on our statutory decarbonisation obligations. And our floating offshore capacity is second only to Norway at around 25 gigawatts. We have the largest pipeline of floating offshore projects anywhere in the world. And of course, in the Celtic Sea, we have an enormous potential for floating offshore wind, and we are determined to take advantage of the opportunities that that represents. Earlier this year, the Floating Offshore Wind Task Force estimated that it could contribute £47 billion in GVA to the UK economy by 2050 and support up to 97,000 jobs across the country. So we are hard at work right across government and in the private sector to make sure that we realise the vast potential of this opportunity. And the test and demonstration projects, which a number of honourable members have rightly raised today, total 432 megawatts of capacity in development in the Celtic Sea, are crucial, not just for the capacity that they generate, but for helping us to understand the supply chains, the development and building the skills in the future. And we want to see as many of these projects succeed, and government is doing everything we can to support those projects. And in the next offshore wind leasing round, the Crown Estate, which Crown Estate has recently launched, a further 4.5 gigawatts of floating wind capacity in the region will have an impact of up to 5,300 new jobs and £1.4 billion boost to the economy. We are determined that by working together with the Crown Estate on an innovative approach to this leasing round, we can ensure that there is new industry that provides the social and economic opportunities for communities right across the country. And it is important for us to say that it is this government's absolutely key priority that we are not agnostic on the industrial future of this country, that we want to see the good, well-paid jobs here as well. My honourable friend rightly highlighted the examples of Kincardine, and there are other projects as well where all of the parts were manufactured abroad and towed into our waters simply to start generating. That is the part of this that we do not want to see again. We want to see the good, well-paid jobs here. And that's why the Crown Estate's launched a £50 million supply chain accelerator to fund and accelerate supply chain projects. 13 successful organisations are set to receive funding in the initial round, and just yesterday we were able to announce more details on these. And £5 million of funding was awarded to kickstart a range of projects across Great Britain, contributing to a combined development investment of over £9 million, with £400 million of capital investment. And as has been mentioned, the partnership that Great British Energy, the first publicly owned energy company in 70 years, has with the Crown Estate is about trying to drive forward even more of those opportunities right across the country. Now, ports has also been mentioned by a number of honourable members. They clearly are going to play an absolutely vital role in the deployment and maintenance of offshore wind infrastructure, and up to £4 billion of investments required by 2040 to support the rollout of floating offshore wind. And that's why the FLOMUS scheme that's providing grant funding to support the development of port infrastructure is so important. The shadow spokesperson rightly referenced the importance of the Port Talbot and the Port of Cromarty Firth in the FLOMAS scheme. We are moving forward due diligence on that as quickly as possible. It's one of a number of in-progress decisions we inherited from the previous government, which we are moving as quickly as possible to actually deliver, so that that funding can be put to good use as quickly as possible. And it goes hand in hand with the creation of the National Wealth Fund, which will invest at least £5.8 billion of capital in the 5 sectors announced in our manifesto, including port infrastructure. And that goes alongside some of the work that's already been done by the NWF in Ardeshir Port, the Port of Tyne and Tees Works. To understand the barriers of port infrastructure, we're working closely with the Port and Tasks Finnish Group, led by Renewables UK, to make sure that we are building on the work that's already been done. And on the wider point of working together, which my honourable friend raised earlier, the Flow Commission that Cornwall Council is involved in, DESNES has a standing invite to, and officials regularly engage with all councils, including Cornwall Council, on this and many other issues, and we're very happy to do more on this. So, finally, on the industrial point, in the spring we will publish the Government's industrial strategy, which is our commitment to make sure that good, well-paid, trade unionised jobs come to these shores to deliver the energy transition and in a number of other sectors. And most recently we announced the Clean Industry Bonus as part of the CFD scheme, which rewards fixed and floating offshore wind developers who choose to invest in the UK's poorest communities or in cleaner manufacturing facilities, and a portion of that budget is ring-fenced for floating offshore wind components. And on the broader points which honourable members raised around the next rounds in the Contracts for Difference auction, we will be seeing more on auction round 7 in due course. Clearly, it is important to recognise how much the industry has moved since the abject failure under the previous government in auction round 5, where much of the sector was flat on its back. We have moved as quickly as possible on AR6 to get projects over the line. Clearly, we want to see more of these projects succeed, and we will have more to say imminently on AR7, and of course there will be a consultation on that process as well. So, in conclusion, Mr Efford, can I once again thank my honourable friend for bringing this debate, and all honourable members for their contributions, but also their real commitment to this. This is a government that is determined to make sure we realise our potential in communities right across this country, that we drive forward towards clean power by 2030, not for an end in itself, but because it will make energy in Britain cleaner, cheaper and more secure for our entire nation, and will reinvigorate long-neglected supply chains in clean energy and engineering, and return a sense of pride and prosperity to all parts of this country. And the road ahead is, of course, going to be challenging. No one comes into government to just tackle the easy stuff. We are determined that together we will make sure that we achieve the most difficult task of all, that by 2030 we will have a secure energy system and a cleaner energy system. And the prize, of course, at the end of it is worth all of that effort. And there's no point in being in government if we're not going to tackle some of these long-term difficult challenges. So can I thank again honourable members for participating in this debate, and I encourage them to keep up the challenge on government as we make sure that we do realise every single opportunity available to us in this most important sector. Thank you.
To wind up, we've got 27 minutes. This is not an invitation to a 27-minute speech. It's just a few minutes to emphasise the key points you want to take away from the meeting.
Thank you, Mr Efford. I won't be very long. I certainly won't be 27 minutes. Just to say thank you so much for the Minister and for everybody who's come here today. You can tell by the passion how much we want this for the region, as has been set out by so many people. We have some really deprived post-industrial areas where we are, and they've been post-industrial, particularly in Cornwall, for a lot longer than other places. So this is something, along with the other, we could be a renewable gold mine if you look at the critical minerals as well. There's so much potential in Cornwall, and it's become so important and so desperate that we start to realise some of those benefits, really. And there is enough for the whole region, for the whole of the South West, for Wales. This is a huge project, and that's really important to note as well. I would like to say, actually, that myself and the member for Pembroke have taken over from the previous member for North Devon and my predecessor in Truro and Falmouth, who did a lot of good work on that APPG for floating offshore wind in the Celtic Sea. And it's brilliant to be able to take that work forward as fast as we can, really. So the social value will be huge. I want to emphasise that again and again and again, how those jobs and that supply chain and bringing some of that fabrication, if we can, manufacturing, the operations and maintenance, not having to tow things across the sea, how important it is that we get there. And I suppose the clean industry bonus that the Minister spoke about is brilliant. I would still emphasise how important those contracts for difference will be, looking at the way they can be, I was going to say manipulated, that's not the right word, but used and ring-fenced to try and push forward some of those test and demo models. They really will have the capacity to do that if they're used properly to get those stepping stone projects forward. And I was really pleased to hear what he said about ports as well. Of course, our ports are ready to build up for so many reasons. Floating offshore wind is one of them, but there are many others as well. And that port task and finish group and a strategic sort of nationwide as well as regional idea for how our ports will work together is going to be so important as well. The supply chain and the workforce. Again, I do want to emphasise the possibility of using contract clauses in those auction rounds. We are able to do that despite WTO rules, and maybe think again about those option fees and how they could be ploughed back into the areas to try and build that supply chain and stimulate that local operations assembly and fabrication. And very pleased as well to hear about the discussions with NESO and GB Energy, because the grid has been holding back so many projects across the country, and it seems that those projects have been kind of put in chronological order rather than any order of merit or importance. And if NESO are looking again at that, that's a really, really good thing, and it will be very important to get those. 2037 for one of these projects was just crazy. We can't be doing that. That has to change. So I suppose to finish off, and I certainly haven't gone on for 27 minutes, it's just to say that we really do need that unified strategy. And the member for North Devon was right about bringing people with us, about bringing our fishers with us, bringing our environmentalists with us. There is a huge space in the ocean for all of this to be done successfully, but it really needs championing and it needs leading. And I think the point about how dispersed politically we are in the southwest compared to other regions, maybe like Scotland, that have a national government up there to work with our government in the UK. We don't have that in the southwest. We have councils and we have a devolved nation, and it's harder to put all that together in one place. And various organisations like Celtic Sea Power, like the New Flow Commission, are starting to try to do that. But that leadership, I think, is going to be so crucial as we move forward, and to find where that will come from, whether it be national leadership, whether it be regional leadership, is going to be a very important function of what we do going forward. So thank you very, very much for your time, Mr. Efford, and thank you all so much for participating in this today.
Question is, the House has considered floating offshore wind in the Celtic Sea. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order. Order.